So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for September 1st, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan, you're out of here.
Been caught stealing. I've been caught stealing.
You're out.
Although, I will say, this movie does miss a huge opportunity to capture the 90s, and for a movie like Caught Stealing, not utilizing the song Been Caught Stealing by Jane's Addiction, come on, Darren Aronofsky, what are you doing?
What are you doing? We're here to talk about Darren Aronofsky, his latest movie. I am still not sure about that for reasons we'll talk about, but
okay.
I think it's very possible that Darren Aronofsky walked onto the set of Caught Stealing and someone from legal was there, saw him, and just assumed he was the director and jotted his name down on the list as being the director, and Aronofsky just went with it. That's what I think happened.
This is going to be a really fun conversation. I'll simply say that.
I mean,
I saw
you will.
I saw your tweet, and now you're opening this show with that direct statement. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really fascinating. I am looking forward to getting into that because it is a very weird experience, I think, for Darren Aronofsky. It's not wholly separate from the rest of his films, but in a lot of ways it is. And I look forward to getting into it. I guess before we do, perhaps we can do a quick Aronofsky roundup here before we get into it, in case there are any new listeners here.
How long do we have?
That's why I said quick.
Can we do it quickly?
Yeah-ish. Yeah, a brief synopsis. You got 2 minutes. How do you feel about Darren Aronofsky? 2 minutes, you're on the clock. Go.
Short word, agnostic, I guess.
Okay.
I love at least one or two of his films. I don't hate any of his films, but I understand why his films are so polarizing. Even a movie like The Whale, which is admittedly my least favorite of his, and it is a movie that I do think gets worse the more you think about it. But I still have some admiration for it, that it does provoke a conversation around things that people might feel like are kind of taboo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think his movies always do that, even if they are very on the nose and very literal more often than not, right? I feel like that is kind of a common trait. His goal is really more to make you feel what his intended goal is, as opposed to stimulate you intellectually. His movies are not really about that. And I think, at least for me personally, I think the movies of his that work best are the ones when he's not taking himself too seriously. I think that's why I really enjoy Mother, which might be maybe my favorite of his. Although I do really like The Wrestler. I think that might be the best exercise in empathy that we've ever seen from him. But I do really like Mother, and I think Black Swan is also a lot of fun. So I think that's the side of him I do like, even though I know a lot of people tend to reference movies like Requiem for a Dream, for instance, as maybe his best work, and I can certainly understand why. But I certainly don't hate his films. They definitely provoke a reaction, and I respect that. I wouldn't necessarily call myself the biggest Aronofsky fan if I maybe still love one or two of his films. So that's kind of where I sit on him.
Yeah, generally I'm in a similar camp. I do really like all of his movies. I wouldn't say that he's a favorite filmmaker of mine, or that any of these are movies that I'm going to champion in any given year, but I do think they are really quite good to great. Requiem, I do think, is one of the best films of 2000.
Yeah.
The Fountain is really good, at least to a point. I think it kind of stumbles over its ambition, but I admire and respect the ambition of that film.
Me too.
The Wrestler is great. That's probably his best overall movie, but I really like Black Swan. I love Mother. Mother actually might be his masterpiece. That's the one that I
It's
would probably champion the most.
yeah, it's the
But
most Aronofsky film as well.
which I love.
That's what I like about
love
it.
its
Yeah.
unfettered chaos. It is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a film that isn't trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of its themes. It's just doing it in the most chaotic way possible.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. The Whale and Noah, I go back and forth on as far as my least favorite.
Mhm.
The Whale, I think I admire more than Noah. Noah feels like a movie he did for money as a director for hire kind of thing, which I don't blame him. A lot of directors do that. Go make your money and then make your movies because, again, right after Noah is Mother. So he probably took the money from Noah in order to make Mother. I don't blame him for that, but it does feel maybe his most distant. The Whale, at the very least, has his thumbprint all over it, but I don't think it fully comes together. I don't think it's nearly as bad as the discourse made it out to be. I think it is a movie about addiction, which, funny enough, nobody talked about during that award season. I don't understand that at all.
It was just a
But I do
completely different
think-
vice to talk about
Yes.
addiction. Yeah.
I think it's a striking movie about addiction. But again, it doesn't necessarily always come together. And I do think Brendan Fraser is really good in the movie.
It's one of those movies that I think is better as an idea than it is as a movie, if that makes sense. But I admire the idea and the central, I guess, thesis that Aronofsky is trying to provoke.
Yes. So that leads us to Caught Stealing. And I'm curious to get into this one because it sounds like maybe we're going to differ on this one a little bit, which is going to be interesting.
Maybe. And if we do, we definitely like to hone in on those opportunities to maybe not necessarily argue, but for many listeners of the show and for new listeners of the show, just to fill you in, JD and I tend to share the same brain. We tend to be pretty lockstep on a lot of things when it comes to movies. And when we disagree on a movie, it's usually over little things. And we somehow still find our way to overall agree on the general quality of a film, even if we find disagreements along the way in getting there. I have a hunch that's what's going to happen here.
Okay. Well, let's get into it. Caught Stealing is directed by, you'll never guess this, Darren Aronofsky. It stars Austin Butler, Zoe Kravitz, Regina King, Liev Schreiber, Vincent D'Onofrio, Matt Smith, and others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Caught Stealing, burned out ex-baseball player Hank Thompson unexpectedly finds himself embroiled in a dangerous struggle for survival amidst the criminal underbelly of 1990s New York City, forced to navigate a treacherous underworld he never imagined. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, let's get into this. Brennan, what did you think about Caught Stealing?
Well, we did also allude to this already, or at least I did in the very opening of this episode, but this movie also takes place in the year 1998, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the synopsis just says 1990s, as I noted, but specifically at the beginning of the film, it is 1998 in New York, yes.
Yeah, and I do think that is important given where New York was at that time, the Lower East Side specifically, where this mostly takes place. Gentrification was a huge talking point at that time, and this is only 3 years before 9/11, which is not necessarily connected to this specific story, but that backdrop does play into a lot of the tonal choices that Aronofsky is playing with here. I think where I had a really interesting reaction to this movie, it kind of started to reveal itself for me as I was watching it. So I'll simply say this, and this is where I think you and I are probably going to agree, at least generally, when it comes to Caught Stealing. I really enjoyed this. I did enjoy this movie quite a bit. It definitely has a different tonal energy when compared to other Darren Aronofsky films. A lot of people have said it's very much inspired by the likes of Guy Ritchie, and I do think that is evident in many cases here. It's also very directly inspired by Martin Scorsese's After Hours from 1985, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
I mean, so much so that Griffin Dunn, who plays Paul in this movie, is featured here. He was the star of After Hours. So there's a
Yeah.
direct tie in there. It's Aronofsky is not someone to play things subtly, right?
I was just about to say that. He's
Yeah.
never been subtle.
Well, that's
ever.
that for better and for worse, that is one of his trademarks. That is
Yes.
one of his trademarks. And
Uh-huh.
I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In the case of Caught Stealing, I think it mostly works, primarily because I did find the film very entertaining. But where I found it kind of interesting was maybe about a third of the way through, I didn't feel much of Aronofsky in this movie. But about the halfway point, I started to realize, or at least sense, I think he's kind of all over this movie. This kind of is absolutely a Darren Aronofsky film. I think because his trademarks are all over this thing, just given some of the thematic choices and how it unfolds itself, it just has a different tonal energy when compared to the likes of Mother or Black Swan or Requiem for a Dream. A lot of it might have to do with Matthew Libatique's cinematography. I think the camera moves in a way that is very reminiscent of past Aronofsky films, and perhaps that has a lot to do with it, and I'm willing to admit it. But I do think there's a lingering sense of sorrow and uncomfortability that tends to make a Darren Aronofsky film a Darren Aronofsky film, and I think that actually is very heavily present here in Caught Stealing, on top of the fact that it's also a movie in typical Aronofsky fashion that is so direct with its thematic ideas, one character has to literally spell the entire theme of the movie out for you at one point. Like that does happen here. And I think a lot of these things and some of the tonal choices it makes from a character standpoint kind of feel very Aronofsky-like. And about around the third act, I felt like I was watching an easy extension of his filmography. It just took a weird journey to get to that point. And I thought that was weird. I did not expect that given how it felt in the first few minutes. We could talk more about that further because given some of your opening thoughts there, maybe you might not go that far with this as far as some of the Aronofsky isms that may or may not be here. But I found that kind of intriguing. I didn't expect that given some of the tonal shifts that this movie is making when compared to some of his heavier movies. This is not one of his heavier movies, but I do think there is still a secret heaviness to it, primarily because of Austin Butler's performance, which I'm sure we'll talk about further.
Yeah, I really liked this film, maybe more so than I was even anticipating. And I think a lot of it comes down to that tonal shift. Again, say what you will about Aronofsky, but this film is unlike anything he's directed in that regard. This film is wildly invigorating and has such a playfulness to it throughout that I really enjoyed. And while a lot of people have been comparing this to After Hours, and it is very inspired by After Hours, the other film or perhaps filmmakers that came to mind for me, and this somewhat circles back to my facetiousness at the beginning of this of him stumbling onto another set, because I think the other set that he may have stumbled onto is the Coen brothers. This feels like a Coen brothers movie through and through. Specifically Fargo, I think, is all over this movie.
Well, especially when we get to the Jewish gangsters. I think that's very Coen-like.
It is very Coen-like. I thought a lot of Fargo, the idea of this ordinary schlub who suddenly finds himself way out of his depth in this criminal entanglement with body counts starting to stack up as the film goes. You also can't help but think of Inside Llewyn Davis a little bit when it comes to the cat and the cat's involvement here and what that means, how that drives a lot of the choices of the characters as well.
That's a good comp. That's a good comp.
I think the Coens, in terms of tone and even in terms of structure a little bit, I think there's more inspiration there, whether that was intentional or not. I do think After Hours is very much a purposeful inspiration.
That's the homage.
And Aronofsky has talked about that. It is very much out in the open, but maybe even more so than that great Scorsese film is the Coens in terms of the tone and the energy and the criminal entanglement of it all, man, this just, it flowed and felt like a Coen Brothers movie. And I say that very complimentary. Don't get me wrong. I'm not
Sure.
saying that as a bad thing. I love the Coens. I love Fargo. I think it's one of the best films of the 90s. Inside Llewyn Davis, I think, is arguably the best film of the 2010s. So taking those films as inspiration. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that this film is following that blueprint. And it's why for a large chunk of the film, I didn't really feel Aronofsky, but you are right. It's not totally distant from Aronofsky in terms of, one, how he shoots his movies. I agree with you about the cinematography, but also in terms of the gravitas that he brings to the drama and the violence that unravels in this film. There's still, again, a lot of that Coen slapstickiness throughout this film, even when the film ups the ante in terms of its violence. But there is a grounded sensibility to it that I very much did appreciate. That is that Aronofsky chaos that I really do appreciate. So I agree with you. It's not totally empty of Aronofsky. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I would maybe put more emphasis on that tonal change, on that tonal swing that makes it feel like, makes it feel so different than anything else he's done, to the point where it is almost hard to imagine that he's the one behind the helm here. And maybe it's also just because I've studied the Coen brothers so much over the last 20 years that I couldn't help but see that influence here. But again, when the Coen brothers are your pedestal, that's okay. I mean, there are worse filmmakers you could try to imitate here.
That's a fair point. Yeah. So it sounds like we're not too far off then.
But so I really enjoyed it. I love the Coen energy. I love the After Hours energy here. Austin Butler is really great. And I think for Aronofsky, this is a really refreshing change of pace.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's also still in keeping with the trajectory of Aronofsky as a filmmaker, because neither of his films really are that similar, at least as they function as genre exercises in a way, right?
Sure.
They all tend to carry different coats, if you will, but internally they have a very similar heaviness to them, right? And Caught Stealing is in keeping with Aronofsky in many ways for those reasons. It just has a very different genre coding that might feel more Coen or Guy Ritchie-like, that makes it feel like such a deviation. Yet at the same time, there is still that sorrowful nature that tends to feel very foreboding and horrifying, especially as it relates to Hank Thompson here, played by Austin Butler. You definitely feel that sadness weighing down on him and the audience as well. Some of those flashback sequences involving a car accident, I'll simply say, those are very Aronofsky. Those are executed in a very Aronofsky way. And I think on top of that, too, the way he shoots New York City here, while there are some complementary things to something like Inside Llewyn Davis for sure, the way Matthew Libatique, his cinematographer, shoots the movie here is that he's very dedicated to capturing the ugliness and the griminess of New York City. And that kind of sliminess, if you will, also feels very in keeping to Darren Aronofsky. I tend to feel that kind of almost brown hue of sorts in a lot of his movies. And even the way the camera moves, there's a chase sequence on foot between Hank Thompson and these two Jewish gangsters, which is shot in a way where I sat there and thought, yeah, this feels like the guy who made Black Swan. There's like, there is a little bit of that there. And I also love how that chase sequence as well just inadvertently channels Hank's baseball skills, which we could talk a little bit about further. I thought that was actually really clever. One of the few moments of nuance that I've ever seen Aronofsky actually work with, which I thought was really cool. But I do think it's a neat deviation, and yet he still makes something that I feel comfortable calling a Darren Aronofsky film simultaneously. I think it nicely sits in that middle space, and the more I sit with this one, it might actually rank as mid to upper tier Aronofsky for me. And I think it's because it goes back to that thing I like the most from him. I like him most when he's not taking himself too seriously. And this is a movie that is having a lot of fun. And sometimes I think his comedic bite is some of his best attributes, especially in a movie like Mother, for instance, and even to some extent Black Swan. I think those two movies are kind of funny in a lot of ways. And this movie is tapping into maybe a different comedic energy, but it still has a sense of humor to it that I sometimes like. It's a very mean and nihilistic sense of humor, but
Sure.
but
Again, the
sometimes,
Coens.
yeah, absolutely. That's a fair point. Like I said, that is a good comp for sure, and I didn't even think about that when I was coming out of the movie. But I do like when Aronofsky tries to flirt with comedic disaster every now and then, and this is definitely one of those times.
Yeah, a phrase that you would absolutely label on almost all of the Coens movies in some sort of way. And I do think the comedic sensibility here is biting, and I think it does a great job of mimicking the Coens in that way when you couple it with the performances as well. Again, I do like how he couples that with his dramatic storytelling as well. You were talking about the flashbacks. I think those are handled really well and gives us some insight into Hank and his past and why he makes the choices that he does throughout this film. And then there's a pretty significant turn about midway through the film that we'll talk about more in detail here in a moment.
Yeah.
But once you get to that point, the film does shift quite a bit tonally, that you really started to feel the Aronofsky of it all there. But again, that's something that you feel even in a lot of Coen brother films as well.
Yeah.
But he does it in such an Aronofsky way here that does feel a little singular. That does make Caught Stealing kind of its own unique thing.
Sure.
That I do really appreciate. And I do like how baseball is kind of how it infiltrates itself into this movie. There's a lot between Hank and his mother throughout this film where he's calling her constantly. They're talking about the Giants, and I love how baseball just has like it's this subtle little gag throughout the film that ends up kind of boiling up to a point where it becomes more physical in the back half of the film.
Kind of part of the plot in a way.
Becomes part of the plot in a way. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really fun. So like, I think that's all handled really well here. And again,
I agree.
with Austin Butler's performance, he gives a lot of credence to Hank and some of that emotional volatility that he's experiencing. When you couple it with some of those narrative swings, it's not just like there's this major one that I mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah.
That involves some violence, I'll say vaguely for now. But it's not just that swing. There's another one when he's talking to a character that he thinks he's safe around. And then it turns out that's not true. There's just these constant teeters with Hank where he gets caught in these traps. And I love how Austin Butler continues to react to it. Again, it bridges that middle ground perfectly of
it does.
It's funny, it's humorous, but there's also this emotional heft to it simultaneously. It's really good.
And that's the Aronofsky touch, where he brings that emotional weight to these situations that don't really feel all that Aronofsky. Really, the script and the story itself is the most disconnecting thing when compared to the rest of Aronofsky's filmography. But when Aronofsky comes to play to turn it into something that feels very Aronofsky, it's when he finds whatever the thematic idea is here and he hits you over the head with it. Austin Butler at one point over a payphone, I'll simply say, spells out the theme of the movie so literally for us that if you missed it, then you just weren't paying attention. The movie is a clear allegory of guilt and feeling like everything, your past mistakes are in fact your fault, and how running from them gets you nowhere. That is the blueprint of what this movie is. It's not hiding from that. But Aronofsky likes to make you feel the weight of those sometimes very relatable ideas. That's his goal more often than not in his movies. And I think he does mostly succeed here because he does have a great star performance in Austin Butler here. This might be one of his better performances, honestly. He carries this movie very well and is one of the main things that allows it to really differentiate itself from being too heavily compared to someone like a Guy Ritchie or a Joel and Ethan Coen. The way Butler is able to work alongside Aronofsky that partnership makes this feel like another Aronofsky film for the most part for me. Like that's how they fill in those plotting gaps to make it feel more than just an entertaining thrill ride.
Yeah, I don't think you need the phone call to, for those themes to register necessarily, but
Right,
I
you don't.
understand the scene given some of the dramatic back and forth that we see throughout the film and why
Yeah.
he's so concerned. So I don't think it's totally out of left field either. Again, pun intended, perhaps. We'll find all the baseball puns here.
It's the writing of the specific dialogue, less so the fact that that character is having a conversation like that in the first place. It's more so the former.
Yeah. But I think Austin Butler, to your point, does a great job of making all of that work, because there's not, at least for me, I don't know how much thematic nuance there is here. But again, going back to that Roger Ebert thing of it's not what it's about, it's how it's about. That's where I think Austin Butler, where he's phenomenal here, because
He kind of saves the movie in a way.
despite how trite the themes are as it relates to guilt, he does such a great job of carrying that weight.
Yeah.
Whether it be the flashback scenes and what we find out about him and his friend, his relationship with his girlfriend, the stakes at the end of the film with his mom. Like, this is a young man who lost everything and is continuing to lose everything.
Yeah.
But is still finding something to fight for. And again, I don't like, this isn't Aronofsky trying to it's almost antithetical to Mother from a thematic sense in that regard. There's not much density to this film in that regard, but Butler, he kind of, to your point, he bridges that gap a little bit. He's able to add a little bit more that isn't really there on the page. And it does speak to his performance. I don't know if this is his best performance, but it's very much up there for sure. I think it is really, really good. And I think about it in the same way as, again, going back to those great Coen classics and these fun, diverting crime movies that they make and the central performances that carry them. I do think about this in that same way. And it definitely speaks to Butler and his charisma and his ability to carry a film like this.
And honestly, what makes it work too, or at least the litmus test to make sure that it's working, it's when you get to the final act, and I'll say this vaguely before we get into any more spoilers here, but there comes a clear moment where Hank decides to, let's just say, start fighting back, we'll simply say, okay? There is something very wildly cathartic about watching that. Like, you do feel for that. At least I felt something watching those moments play out. There's a scene with him at a batting cage, sort of ramping up his vengeful pushback, if you will. And there is something very emotionally cathartic about that. So, and again, that's kind of the Aronofsky thing, making you feel something first as opposed to thinking about something later. This is not necessarily a movie I'm going to think about, but I can easily sit back and watch this again and enjoy myself. And I might still have a feeling provoked from it. And that's where I think he's at his most interesting. And Butler's very good at that.
I agree. Let's go ahead and jump into spoilers then, because there are a few things we need to talk about here in detail. So fair warning for those that have not seen the film, we're going to veer into spoilers here for the rest of this conversation. Let's talk about Zoe Kravitz as Yvonne, who is Hank's girlfriend in this film. They have a great little dynamic at the beginning of this film. And then again, spoilers, last warning here, at the midway point, she is killed off. And it is this major turn in the film, because so much of everything we had seen up until that point was quite lighthearted in tone. It was almost acting as a pure comedy in a lot of sense.
Yeah,
and then
it's the moment that's there to tell the audience, no, this is real. This is real.
Yeah, this isn't just going to be a screwball comedy. and you have a fun little boyfriend-girlfriend dynamic here. No, this is real. We are dealing with gangsters that are formidable, and there's real consequences to running from them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that scene, because it is pivotal, and it was the moment in the film where you started to, at least for me, that's when I felt Aronofsky going, okay, we've had some fun, and now I'm entering the mold here in a big way.
That's true. Up until that point, maybe you could sense a few Aronofsky things, like the way he moves the camera. There's a tracking shot as Hank is climbing out his fire escape that feels like a very Aronofsky thing to do, but those are more tangible things. They're more physical things. It's not until Yvonne is killed and the way Hank finds her that you start to feel the emotional weight that Aronofsky is known for. And I do think it is an effective scene. In any other movie, I would probably criticize that, saying that we don't get enough time between Yvonne and Hank to really let that relationship blossom into something. But that's kind of the point here. The fact that they have such great chemistry that is then completely ripped away from both Hank and the audience. That's kind of why it has an impact, right? Why her death does have an impact. If I have any reservations about the killing of Yvonne, it's more of a grander thing I keep wrestling with. And I guess it mostly falls back on Charlie Houston's writing. And this is based on a book of his that I have not read. So I don't know how word for word it is as an adaptation. For what I understand, it's pretty direct, because it's his own script based on his own novel, and he's credited as the only writer. It's not even adapting his own novel, which makes me think they basically just took the book and filmed that. I feel like that might be what they've done here. So perhaps this potential criticism is also something I would reserve for the original source material. The story itself is wildly predictable. Again, it might not really matter, because Aronofsky isn't really interested in those things. He's more interested in how those events make you feel. But like 5 minutes into the movie, I kind of knew Yvonne was going to die pretty early on. I just got that sense, given how touching their dynamic was. It just felt like such an Aronofsky thing to do, to rip that away from us more quickly than another movie would. So it's not a surprise. And this is a movie that, or at least this is a type of movie that could sometimes benefit from a few twists and turns narratively that you don't see coming. But most of them here you do. Pretty much every twist and turn here, I think, is pretty telegraphed in a way. And I would say the death of Yvonne is also pretty telegraphed. Yet at the same time, I felt something when it happened. So it still works in that regard. It feels like it is something that we like that is ripped away from us. So it does put us in Hank's headspace. So in that sense, it does work simultaneously.
I will admit, I wasn't sure. I wasn't nearly as confident as you were. Not even close, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think that speaks to, one, the drastic tonal change from your typical Aronofsky. So maybe some of that is my own baggage I'm bringing into this, knowing and seeing all of Aronofsky's films previously.
Well, I will admit, sorry to cut you off, but I will admit maybe some of that simply has to do with the marketing, because the trailers for this movie have Zoe Kravitz front and center almost as much as Austin Butler, and yet she doesn't get really any billing alongside him. So going into the movie, I thought that must have been something deliberate then. Maybe that had something to do with it, which I'm willing to admit.
Which is why I'm glad I don't pay attention to trailers.
I
go to the movies and I listen to podcasts, or
you are the smart one.
Listen to my audiobooks. Like, I don't pay attention to trailers.
Good man.
Unless it's Hamnet. Then I'm going to watch the Hamnet trailer, because, oh my God, it makes me cry every single time.
That looks so good.
Looks incredible. But typically, and I saw the trailer once, didn't think too much of it, other than it looks fun. It looks different for Aronofsky, and obviously that played dividends to everything we've already discussed here.
Yeah.
But I didn't really pay attention too much beyond that.
Good.
So when I got to the film, I was really immersed in the film on its own terms. Again, other than that baggage of, I've seen all of Aronofsky's films, and you might have expectations based off of that. and this being so tonally different, as I joked about earlier, did he just walk onto the set of a different movie and got credit for it anyway? Like that was kind of what was playing out in the first 30 minutes of the movie. And so I wasn't sure, honestly, especially given some of the initial reactions I saw to this film when it premiered with critics. A lot of them that I saw, again, I didn't really dig too deep here, but from what I saw, people were talking about how fun it is, how different it is for Aronofsky. So its dramatic turns, I expected it to be for them to be here in some way, simply knowing a little bit of what this film was about. But where that was going to come, how far this film was willing to go, that was a little ambiguous for me. And I thought about that dynamic of Kravitz and Butler and how charming and how wonderful that is. That moment when it does come, I was taken aback a little bit. I don't think the film foreshadows that in a heavy way. Where that narrative kind of becomes a little baffling to me, and this circles back to Charlie Houston, either the adaptation of the screenplay or maybe it's the source material as well. But there's a conversation that Hank has with the Regina King character, and Regina King
Roman
is this detective who is in charge of the case, and she's investigating the murder of Yvonne.
Yeah.
And they're sitting in this cafe having a conversation, and King's character of Elise, she tells Hank straight up what had happened, that you ran from these guys and they had to send a message that you got to take this seriously. She tells him that flatly.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of the film and he's in the van there with the brothers, and it's like he has this epiphany where he had to put it together that, oh, these are the killers. Bro, they told you that 40 minutes earlier.
I think
so, like, it's just a weird little screenplay thing where the film is trying to have this cinematic moment that feels empty because it had already told the audience what had happened.
Well,
you would think that Hank would already know this and react differently to the moment. And so the way Aronofsky plays that off comes off contrived to me because of the writing and that redundancy there. So like that's like when it comes to Yvonne and her, the death that she has and the impact, that's where I have an issue with the film.
Well, I think the reason why that emotional impact at the end, when Hank quote unquote realizes that these two Jewish gangsters were in fact responsible for Yvonne's death, just like Roman had said, the reason why it doesn't stick, I think, mostly comes down to how convincing the twist of Roman is. And I think that's another place where the movie fully drops the ball. Again, maybe it was telegraphed or not, but 5 minutes in, I knew Roman was the bad guy or bad woman. Yeah. I don't think the movie is doing a very good job hiding the fact that Regina King is actually the person Hank should be afraid of.
Yeah, that was much less of a surprise to me.
Yeah.
I would say that.
Yeah. But I think if that were more of a surprise and the movie had earned that surprise, then I could actually buy into the fact that Hank would just simply think Roman was lying to him in that diner. And that at that point, he would be fully convinced, oh no, you and your goons, played by Bad Bunny of all people, you're actually the ones responsible for Yvonne's death, only to then realize later, oh no, actually, she was telling me the truth, even though I wasn't supposed to trust her. But I think that moment at the end only works if that surprise reveal of Roman is telegraphed more secretly. And I think that's where the film drops the ball. I think handling Roman really does, it mitigates a lot of the potential suspense, narrative suspense specifically, that may have helped this movie and that particular moment, because otherwise, you're right, it does come off as contrived. But I don't think it was supposed to. I think it was supposed to reflect Hank's uncertainty of who to trust in these respective moments, only for it to come back full circle for him. But that full circle is just not felt because of how badly those reveals around Roman are handled. I think that's where it drops the ball.
It is spotty writing. And I don't necessarily love how all of that comes together. It is sloppily handled there. Again, I don't know if that's the source material, if that's Aronofsky, if it's an editing thing. Maybe there are scenes, other conversations on the cutting room floor that would make sense of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. But the final product, the way that it is handled in this film, I do agree with you. The reveal of Roman as the puppeteer, kind of puppeteering everything here, that was much less surprising.
Yeah.
I did wonder if she was involved in some way, shape, or form, and lo and behold, especially that speech she has right before, where she's talking about how I can't wait to get out of here. I'm going to leave this place forever, and I'm going to go to an island, and how I'm going to go to the swim up bar. And she's talking about going to this luxurious island that, you know, kind of that you would equate with wealth in some sort of way.
Right.
And it very much alludes to the fact and foreshadows that she's probably involved and she has her hands in the money pot in some way, shape, or form. That was quite revealing before her goons walk in.
Yeah.
So I agree with you there. And I think as a result of the sloppiness of that and her straight up telling Hank that Yvonne is dead because you ran from the brothers, she flatly tells him that. So I don't know how that wouldn't register.
Well,
in some sort
but
of way.
I think of it this way. Like if the movie had successfully kept us in Hank's headspace in that moment, and if he were to realize, oh, she just told me this thing, but oh no, you're actually the bad guy. Well, of course I'm going to think you actually killed Yvonne. I feel like the movie is trying to suggest that Hank didn't believe what she had to say in the diner. But because that reveal is handled so poorly as a piece of narrative storytelling, it takes us as the audience out of Hank's headspace for a brief moment. So then that reveal at the end that she was being truthful kind of collapses on itself.
And,
I think
that's a good, and that's a good point, because we are removed from Hank's perspective at that point, and it's a little bit more about the plotting of the moment and the reveal than it is Hank's perspective and how that might have been lost on him in some sort of way. But it doesn't work for me, like that twist, or at least the way those reveals come together, that doesn't work for me. I could have lived with everything up until the end, as sloppily as the Roman reveal is. And maybe it's only sloppy in hindsight because of how the film ultimately plays out. I don't think I would have had an issue with that scene if at the end of the film, like the brothers suggest, he takes the $200,000 they were going to give him, and then he goes home to his mom and he lives happily ever after. If that's how the film had ended, that scene with Roman, I would have had much less of an issue with. But the fact that you now have to connect those dots, it does make it contrived, because even if you're correct about Hank's perspective and that's what he was experiencing, we definitely do not feel that as the audience.
We
are
don't.
not
And
connected
that's
to
why I
that
think
at
it drops the ball, because I think it is trying to keep that intact, our perspective alongside Hank's, and that shared kind of emotional perspective. And it completely, temporarily at least, but at a very particular crucial moment, separates our connection with Hank because of sloppy plotting. And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, because the death of the brothers, it doesn't carry the heft that the film was maybe going for. At least I wasn't fully there with it as a result of that contrivance. Maybe on a rewatch, knowing what happens, I can let go of that and just simply be with the film. I could see that happening on another go, but on this first viewing, it definitely felt deflating. It didn't feel as cathartic for me as it did for Hank in the moment.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. It's a shame what the plotting can do for that.
Yeah. But I do think Liev Schreiber and Vincent D'Onofrio are really fun here, though. I think
agree.
they're really great. I love their dynamic. If they did a spinoff with those two, I would be there for it. I would have a lot of fun. I think they're great supporting characters here.
that's where I definitely sense the Cohen influence, and I guess maybe more in a superficial way, because when they go to that, again, I am not Jewish, so I'm not an expert on that religion, but when they go to this mitzvah, I guess it's called, and they're all still speaking Yiddish, I guess.
Mhm.
I was instantly thinking of the opening prologue to A Serious Man, which
Sure.
but
Yeah.
again, very superficial things. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it does still carry a similar Cohen comedic energy.
A
So
100%. Because
yeah,
even though the dramatic stakes couldn't be higher, we
mhm.
don't know what's going to happen to Hank. He's in grave danger, and yet the film still throws in these bits of comedy that I think are wonderfully played. It
Yeah,
felt so Coen Brothers to me, especially something like Fargo
definitely
in
the
that
most
regard.
direct for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I enjoyed that, like superficially in terms of the comedy and Austin Butler and his performance. I really did have a lot of fun despite those contrivances. I
Mhm.
still had a great time, but yeah, the emotion might not have fully landed the way that it does for
It's
Hank, but in
yeah.
the end, it didn't mitigate my overall enjoyment of the film, though.
Yeah, there are times it's more than just fleeting, but by the end, it
Yeah.
does feel kind of fleeting.
Yeah. But an enjoyable fleeting, not a
Oh yeah,
boring, I
it's
didn't like this fleeting.
it's certainly one of Aronofsky's more entertaining films. That's why I made the comparison to something like Black Swan in a way, because I do think Black Swan maybe has a more uh, emotional core to it for sure, but I still think that's a very fun movie in execution.
Mhm.
This is not similar in that sense, but I do think it does have a similar kind of like uh, goal in a way, as far as being this kind of like having this kind of comedic drive to it, which is why it's probably one of Aronofsky's more entertaining films. I think if I were to rank all 9 of his features, this is probably right in the middle for me at this point.
Probably for me as well. I haven't done that exercise yet. Maybe I'll do that on Letterboxd later this week, but
Hmm.
lower, maybe lower middle
Yeah. Well, I know
again.
you
Just
like Requiem for a Dream quite a bit more than I do. That's admittedly that's lesser for me. That's probably bottom 3 for me. But it's still a movie I greatly admire and have a lot of appreciation for. I just tend to gravitate more towards the lack of seriousness of something like Mother, for instance, which
Mhm.
absolutely kind of rules. I think that movie kind of
I think
rules.
that's his masterpiece. Yeah. I
Mhm.
really love it. That's number one for me. The
Okay.
Wrestler right there. Requiem there for me as well. Black Swan I probably would take over this, but
Yeah, I would too.
this is probably right there after those four, right? With the fountain kind of following. That's probably where I'm at,
Mhm.
somewhere in that neighborhood. Again, I'm just
Yeah.
doing this off the cuff here, but
I should probably rewatch Pi. It's been a while since I've seen that
yeah,
one.
Sam, I need to give that one a go. But that's
Yeah.
98, I believe. So
Oh
that
yeah.
is a
We have
film
an
we could
opportunity.
we'll probably catch up
We
with
have
next year.
we have a year to watch it now.
We got a year to revisit that one as we lead up to our 98 retrospective next summer. All right. Any final thoughts on Caught Stealing before we get out of here?
Yeah, 2 final thoughts. Matt Smith as Russ here.
Oh,
He's
yeah, yeah.
entertaining.
Yep.
He's thankfully not
Fun.
in the movie all that much. Otherwise, he would become severely grating because he's
Fair.
kind of meant to be. He's in the movie just the right amount of time that it doesn't cross the line too much. At times he does, but it's at the times when I think the character of Russ is supposed to cross the line in that way. But I
Mhm.
do think he's mostly entertaining. Um, should we comment on the what seems like a random cameo at the end of the movie?
Yeah, we should. That was gonna be a final thought for me as well.
Okay.
I don't know what it is about Laura Dern. There's something about her being in movies like this that just puts a smile on my
Yeah.
face. Like I
Yeah.
didn't really expect it. I guess
Well,
I,
apparently
I should
there,
I
yeah,
should have tuned into the fact that that was her voice, but I didn't.
I didn't either. And when it happened, I was really caught off guard, thinking, "Wait, like, was she also in After Hours?" And I just forgot about that. Turns out she's not. Um, but apparently there is a specific reason that she's here, and apparently it has something to do with the fact that she was pretty close to Austin Butler and coaching him as an actor while he was growing up. And apparently, Austin Butler in real life, I think, has lost his mom. And some people have told him that Laura Dern kind of looks like his real life mom. So I think that's partly the reason why she was chosen there, primarily due to the Austin Butler of it all, which if that is true, I think that's kind of sweet. Honestly.
That is really great. I didn't know that, but that does make a lot of emotional sense for this film, given Hank's relationship to his mother and the fact that it was her that was the baseball coach, not the dad, kind of reversing roles there, which I think is great. Yeah, no, I love that. That's a fun little tidbit. I did not realize that. That's cool.
So I have an article from USA Today where Austin Butler was speaking of Laura Dern's casting in this movie, and I guess he says, quote, "She's forever entwined with any maternal role in a film or in my life," speaking of his mom specifically. "There are very personal things involved with who plays my mom in this film. My own mother was told she looks like Laura Dern all the time. So it has a very amazing sort of surreal, rich meaning to include her here." End quote.
Wow. Okay. That's cool. I love that.
I agree.
Good on you,
neat.
Aronofsky. That's wonderful. Or the casting director. Whoever made that decision. That's fantastic.
I think it's really cool.
Yeah. I love that. I wanted to note that as a final thought for me as well. And also got to note this because we've been vocal about this the last few weeks when it comes to animal acting in film, but on the dog side. So it's only fair to give Tonic, the cat here, a little bit of love, just to make sure that we're covering our bases.
This is a perfect,
great.
This is a perfect year as any to bring back my best performance by an animal award when we get to the In Session Film Awards.
Absolutely. The sequel to this is just going to be the same series of events, but from Tonic's perspective.
That'll be a weird movie. It'll be an animated movie.
We're going to get more of those. I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
At any rate, Caught Stealing. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. Episode 652. It is available right now. Go and give it a listen. We brought on Julia Sermons of 1999, the podcast, to talk about, and you'll never guess this, the year in film 1999.
How about that?
As we are gearing up for our retrospective next week, we thought it would make sense that because she's one of the co-hosts of that show, hey, let's get her on and get her thoughts on the year. What are her favorite movies? What are her favorite overlooked movies? We talked about award season for that year as well. It was a great time. You can go and check it out. Hopefully a really fun appetizer leading to our retrospective next week on the show. And as you could imagine, gave us more homework to do. So that is what we're off to do this week.
We're going to do our best to do it all.
Exactly. Meaning that this will probably be our only review for this week. We did have 3 last week. If you missed any of those, we had 2 animated films in Nazad 2 and K-Pop Demon Hunters. That was a really great time. And then also, speaking of the Coens, perhaps appropriately to this conversation, Brendan and Shadon talked about Ethan Coen's latest film, Honey Don't, which I will catch up with after. That film is out on digital now, so as soon as we get done with the retrospective, that'll be one of the first films I catch up with. So,
yeah, really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So go and check out all that stuff. Again, be sure to join us for the retrospective next weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be great. Can't wait. So with that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Love Austin Butler. He's so much fun.
Caught Stealing. Jane's Addiction. Where are you?